On Sunday, May 12, 2019, an image was posted on the X Paranormal thread on the image board website 4chan. The image showed a seemingly empty interior, an open space divided by identical walls covered in a faded yellow wallpaper. A dull beige carpet stretched across the floor, appearing stained and worn in places. Overhead, fluorescent lights cast a harsh artificial glow, draining the space of any warmth. And the repetition of textures and color gave the environment a uniform or almost clinical quality to it. While there was nothing overtly threatening about the image, no figures, no signs of life, and nothing to suggest anything bad had happened here, something about it felt inherently unsettling. The image was posted anonymously alongside the prompt, "Post disquieting images that just feel off." Over the next 8 hours, users added to the thread, sharing everything from landscapes to paintings to a mannequin covered in Pop-Tarts. Opinions quickly started to differ, with people arguing over what was actually unsettling and what wasn't. One user even claimed that the only image that truly captured that sense of inexplicability was the original itself. That feeling of discomfort only grew when later that same day, another Anon replied with a comment that transformed the image from strange into something far more unsettling. If you're not careful and you no-clip out of reality in the wrong areas, you'll end up in the Backrooms, where it's nothing but the stink of old moist carpet, the madness of mono yellow, the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at maximum hum buzz, and approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented empty rooms to be trapped in. God save you if you hear anything wandering around nearby, because it sure as hell has heard you. That single comment would come to define the image, giving it a name: the Backrooms. I love how he or she capitalized Backrooms too, as if this person already knew that the Backrooms had franchise potential. What made this different from other internet horror stories was how little it needed to capture people's imaginations. There was no long narrative, no characters, and no antagonist. Just an image with the unsettling suggestion that this place actually existed somewhere beyond the edges of our reality. Because of this viral comment, technically, the Backrooms qualifies as a creepypasta, and would go on to become one of the most well-recognized ones, helping to define a new kind of horror that wasn't built on narrative, but on atmosphere. To fully understand how one image became a phenomenon, the science behind why the Backrooms taps into our fears, and the journey of one anonymous post to multi-million-dollar Hollywood movie stardom, stick around to the end of this video. Welcome to Horror History. If you're not careful and you no-clip out of the normal part of YouTube, you end up on my channel. And if you don't subscribe, you don't make it out of this video alive. Okay, if you didn't see my creepypasta horror history episode, you're missing out on a good episode, but here's what you need to know. Creepypasta is derived from copypasta, a text phrase commonly copy and pasted around the internet. So a creepypasta is essentially a horror story that was shared in that same way. Many of these stories made their way to creepypasta.com, which became a central hub for the genre, where writers could trade tales of terror and internet-era urban legends like Slenderman, Jeff the Killer, and the Russian sleep experiment. Like traditional folklore, they rely on narrative to build suspense, often written in the first person to make the events feel more convincing. Most of these stories tend to expand into multimedia through what I call open source canon, when an entire community contributes to lore and world building rather than a single author. This can include building on the stories themselves, artwork, short films, animations, or cosplay. Yeah, those can be hit or miss. But when it comes to the Backrooms, I'm not sure there's a single example of another creepypasta where the initial text was such a small part of the sensation that would follow. The Backrooms doesn't follow a conventional narrative, there's no series of found documents to give a sense of structure or realism, and not a single character. Just an image of an unfamiliar room and a vague warning about the hell you'll experience if you end up there. Now that I think about it, it was always destined for an open source canon, because it's the perfect starting point to build a horror story that could literally go in any direction. We're gonna get into all of the lore that the internet has projected onto this unnerving snapshot of vacant reality, and the incredible series that became the de facto representative for all Backrooms content. But in order to get there, I first want to explore a little deeper into the meaning of that original post. According to the comments on the original thread, the Backrooms are a place that you might find yourself if you no-clip out of reality, slipping beyond the boundaries of the physical world and into something hidden beyond it. The term no-clip originated from video games. It was a cheat code that would remove the collision detection in walls and objects, allowing players to get out of bounds, particularly in 90s games developed by ID Software, including the first-person shooter Doom and Commander Keen: Secret of the Oracle, which is one of the earliest known uses of the code. It was originally used by developers, allowing them to move freely through levels for testing and debugging purposes. The code was originally entered as ID SPISPOPD, which this may be TMI, but it comes from a 1993 Usenet post making a backhanded compliment about Doom. Listen up, ID Software. Next time you have an impending release of a much anticipated game, make sure its name is not so cool sounding as Doom and much longer to eliminate all of the casual "where can I get X" posts. How about smashing pumpkins into small piles of putrid debris for the next game? So Spiss Popped became kind of an in-joke in the community, and ID Software acknowledged it by making it a cheat code in the game, allowing you to move through objects. This action became known as an ID clip, which eventually gave way to the more common term noclip. The term is still relevant today, because speedrunners will often search for areas where developers forgot to add collision detection and exploit them to get to later parts of the game sooner. These days, most people just call it clipping. Let me show you a clip of clipping from a game where you play as a seafaring clipper.
And probably the biggest reasoning for this was this trick right here, called the door clip. And if you line up your camera correctly, then what will happen is that Link will just jump into the door. That's door clip for you.
It might be technically possible in reality, but if it is, it's astronomically rare. In the context of the Backrooms, the idea is reinterpreted. To no-clip out of reality, it refers to slipping beyond the boundaries of the physical world itself into a space that exists just outside of it. But that's only part of what makes the Backrooms so unsettling. The real unease is the space you end up in, somewhere that feels familiar, but is just not quite right. There's something about discovering obscure things on the internet, which might be part of why concepts like the Backrooms became so popular in the first place. Which actually brings me to today's sponsor, Whatnot. Whatnot is the #1 live stream shopping app where you can buy collectibles, horror merch, retro games, trading cards, movies, and a ton more through live streams and auctions in real time. You can join live auctions, support small businesses, and if you see something you want, you can instantly swipe to place an offer or buy it. It feels kind of like exploring a giant online convention floor. You never know what cool finds you might come across. You can also get stuff you might see in stores for way under the retail price. I ended up grabbing this $35 Bad Habits thread for just $4, then immediately copped the Bloodborne tee for $2. What a steal. And with over 100 categories on the app, there's basically something for everyone. If you use my link in the description or scan the QR code on screen, you'll get $15 off your first purchase anywhere in the app. And also, if you follow CZsWorld on Whatnot, you'll automatically be entered to win $500 in Whatnot credits, which could get you a lot of horror collectibles. Winner will be selected in 1 month. The internet is full of strange corners, but at least this one lets you leave with something. Just click the link in the description to get started shopping today on Whatnot. The word liminal, which comes from the Latin limen, meaning threshold or crosspiece, describes something that exists in a transitional or in-between state. Liminal can refer to emotional states, where a person experiences a transitional period in their life, such as a divorce, grieving period, or career change. Or, as unemployed people trying to impress a date put it, I'm in between jobs right now. So naturally, liminal spaces are places that occupy the space in between. In architecture, these are lobbies, hallways, stairways, that little area in the movie theater where you make sure your phone is on silent and sometimes give back the 3D glasses. These spots are known for being places that are non-places, passages that don't really have unique character. There's nothing inherently threatening about these spaces, but since we're used to just passing through, stopping to examine them can start to feel a little unsettling, since it's not how we're used to perceiving them. But in 2016, the definition of liminal space was expanded, and people began using it not only to describe a place in between places, but a place in between states. No, not like that. A place in between states of being. Like a home in between occupants to live there. A mall in between abandonment and demolition. Or a grocery store in between closing time and opening. Some such environments can naturally create feelings of horror or creepiness. According to Stephen Kaplan of the University of Michigan, a space can create the feeling of mystery when it suggests something is there, but doesn't give you enough information to understand what it is, pushing your brain to explore it further. A study conducted by researchers in the Department of Psychology at Knox College suggests that creepiness is generally elicited by threat ambiguity, the sense that there may be danger present, but no clear way to confirm it. The human brain is constantly trying to interpret its surroundings. It likes to look for recognizable patterns, which allow us to predict what might come next. But when something doesn't make sense, the brain instinctively tries to resolve it, filling the gaps with what information it has. Our brains will often prepare us for the worst as a means of safety. In that sense, a liminal space offers us just enough detail to feel familiar or recognizable, but still leaving us with that feeling that something is seriously off. That sense of familiarity, combined with something being subtly wrong, is similar to the concept referred to as the Uncanny Valley, a term coined by Masahiro Mori in 1970. This is the hypothesized idea that there's a correlation between how human-like an object appears and our emotional response to it. Essentially, the more an object, like a robot for example, appears human-like, the more appealing and cute they become to us, but only up to a certain point. Once they become too realistic, our response changes and we often begin to feel unease or even revulsion towards them. This is known as the Uncanny Valley. That's often considered to be the reason so many people find some puppets, clowns, or dolls so creepy. Characters like Wall-E or Pikachu are styled to be just humanoid enough to be considered cute or safe. But something like Telenoid, a communication robot designed by Hiroshi Ishiguro, or Sophia, a humanoid robot developed by Hanson Robotics, crosses that threshold. They're close enough to resembling a real person that it feels unnatural when they don't move or express themselves as we would.
Hell, Alan, it's fine.
I knew it was gonna do that.
You're fine. Let's just go kill the boss's wife.
A similar idea can be seen in something known as incongruent affect, where a person's verbally expressed emotions and their physical expressions do not line up. I've talked about this in my Pennywise and Michael Myers episodes to explain why audiences find these characters so unsettling. Michael's blank, emotionless mask doesn't fit the horror of the violent actions he commits, while Pennywise's playful, friendly exterior hides a dangerous predator and feels out of place in the sewer. They're characters that have the appearance of one thing, while their actions suggest something far more sinister. But unlike the Uncanny Valley, incongruent affect can be applied to places as well as people. Among my favorite examples are abandoned theme parks. Our brains have been conditioned to see theme parks as crowded places buzzing with activity because that's how they are when you visit them. So, when we see them empty, dark, and desolate, it creates a sense of unease. The location is portrayed incongruently with how we expect, and that triggers a survival instinct that tells us that something is wrong. The same feeling can be applied to office buildings or schools. If you've ever forgotten something at school and returned when everyone else has left, you'll know that feeling. And that's how we ended up with the Backrooms. I think the Backrooms resonates with so many of us because for the majority of people in modern society, office jobs are kind of the default, and most of us have an experience with what an office building is supposed to look like during work hours. You may think that as a YouTuber, I am not one of those people, but in college, I did intern for a production company called After Dark Films, which was really my only office desk job. But actually, the last job I did before going full-time on YouTube was taking inventory for large post-production facilities. So I was basically going through these office buildings and cataloging items. It makes you appreciate how much of a company's value lies in its stuff. Sometimes we would go into floors that had been vacated for remodeling or something, and it was exciting for me because A, less work because there were no items to catalog, and B, it gave off kind of an eerie feeling, like getting out of bounds in a video game or sneaking into a closed mall. And I like spooky things, so that part was cool. I always wanted to play hide and seek in one of those buildings, but the boss unfortunately never let us. So yeah, then I became a YouTuber instead. As the concept has grown, liminal space has become something of an art genre online, with communities like r/liminal spaces broadening the term to include streets, theaters, libraries, and swimming pools. Places that aren't traditionally considered transitional, but still carry that same unsettling feel. We've even seen creators like Any Austin explore the concept of liminal spaces in video games.
So it is, of course, weird to spend like additional time sitting in this environment and just kind of taking it in. It's another one of those places that if you removed all of the music and just had it be reverberating sound effects, it would be a very creepy cave.
And Jaden Salads, who has made a career out of finding and exploring popular liminal spaces from the internet and analyzing their history. Architect Tara Ogle describes these as spaces that are liminal in a temporal sense, existing somewhere between use and disuse, past and present. They are environments that are transitioning from one identity to another. So the Backrooms take advantage of the ambiguity of creepypasta, the incongruent affect of liminal spaces, but I actually think there's a third psychological concept that really brings the whole image together, and that is the color. And it has a bigger impact on your brain than you might think. Over time, audiences have been conditioned in how we interpret what we're seeing, especially in the horror genre. In the same way that we've been groomed by years of media to know that blue is the color of sadness, or the red folder is for language arts, or that green teams suck in pro football, the color yellow has its own set of associations. Traditionally, yellow is perceived as a positive color, associated with warmth and light. Across different cultures, it has represented everything from wisdom in Buddhism, to divinity in ancient Egypt, to mourning in certain Latin American cultures. But in horror movies, yellow has more commonly come to represent a very powerful concept, the idea of madness. While the trope could go go back further, the publication of the short story The Yellow Wallpaper in 1892 might have been the big example that helped solidify the association between the color and mental illness. But we'll come back to that in a little bit because it's undoubtedly a very important influence for the Backrooms. In film, the cinematic connotations of yellow likely came from the Italian crime chiller subgenre giallo, where the color became linked to violence and psychological instability. The word giallo itself literally means yellow, believed to have been taken from the yellow covers of the pulp crime novels of the 1930s and 40s that inspired the film genre. Another example of yellow being used to depict madness is my own personal favorite horror film, The Shining, where the feelings of isolation and Jack's descent into madness are framed by the yellow walls and doors of the Overlook Hotel. And if that wasn't proof enough, the movie poster itself is just a vibrant yellow. Since then, yellow has appeared across horror, in everything from the lair of the insane antagonist in Split, to the physical and psychological torture of the needle pit in Saw 2, to the claustrophobic panic of House of Wax. Perhaps one of the most effective uses of the color can be found in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where the use of yellow creates the sense of oppressive heat, decay, and discomfort. We've also seen it used beyond just the color of environment. Like in Midsummer, the use of yellow represents the rejection of her old life as the protagonist Danny joins an insane cult. And in It and Coraline, the iconic raincoats worn by kids symbolize the loss of childhood innocence with a step into something much darker. CZsWorld's Try Not to Bring Up Coraline challenge, this is basically just a weekly humiliation ritual at this point. When audiences look at the image of the Backrooms, they're probably bringing their own associations with them, built over years of exposure to horror's representation of it. But in this instance, those associations are reinforced by what's actually in the image. At a glance, the space looks like it should have a purpose. It resembles an office or the back area of a retail store, but there's no furniture and no indication of how the space is meant to be used. That confusion is reinforced by the repetitive nature of the space. The same wallpaper, the same carpet, the same continuous fluorescent lighting. Each part of the space blends into the next. With no distinguishing features or landmarks to anchor yourself to, and no variation to tell one area from another, it's difficult to get a sense of the scale or layout without getting disoriented. Even the composition of the photo adds to this. It doesn't feel deliberate. The crooked angle suggests that it was taken quickly without any thought. All of this comes together to make the space feel labyrinthine, like a hedge maze, but with the hedges replaced by soul-sucking corporate 1980s wallpaper. And the core fear that comes with being lost in a maze is the worry that you'll never find your way out. Ever since the Backrooms image was posted on the 4chan thread in 2019, fans have theorized and speculated over the origin of the photo. For years, its source remained unknown. But as with any online mystery, all you need are some internet sleuths who are, quote, between jobs, some potato chips, and some energy drinks, and eventually you're going to get your answer. In May 2024, a user on X-Twitter claimed that their friend had identified the location of the Backrooms image. As I understand it, this was the result of a wider investigation carried out by a Backrooms Discord community. Their search eventually led them to a 2003 blog post recovered on Wayback Machine. The images were traced back to a former furniture store called Roner's Furniture, located at 807 Oregon Street in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. In 2002, the building was acquired by the chain Hobbytown and underwent renovations. During this process, photographs were taken to document the interior, which were later uploaded to the store's weblog in 2003. Remember when stores had blogs? I don't really, but I do remember when websites had blogs. Hard to believe we traded that for a washed up billionaire trying to cope because you can't buy a cure to loneliness. Multiple images of the store renovation were documented in the original post, but the only two shots that remain visible today on the Wayback Machine are the Backrooms image and a second angle, which seems to have once been a bedroom display when the store was still open, which is stated to be part of the same room, which the webpage labels as the East Oval Room. The blogger notes significant water damage, which had resulted in the space being stripped down to its bare structure. As of writing, the hobby store still exists, now named John's Hobbies, but the actual back rooms of the building have now been split off into Revolution Racing, a radio-controlled car racing track. Some have speculated that this is the actual room where the photo was taken, but notice the orientation of the lights doesn't match here. It probably is the same room, but honestly I spent way too much time looking into this, and if this is the East Oval Room, both the walls and ceiling have been completely reconfigured, with barely any remnants from before the remodel.
The coloring up there looks like the same coloring as the original pictures. I don't know.
Many have tried visiting to piece it together, but despite the location of the original image being identified, there's still a level of mystery. No one seems to be able to figure out exactly where the famous room was within the space. And I kinda like that about it. It maintains the fantasy that the Backrooms really do exist outside of our reality. And the location is not the only thing about the Backrooms that is disputed. While most trace it back to the 2019 4chan post, some believe that the idea may have existed long before that. On the r/Backrooms subreddit, a post titled "I swear the Backrooms are from before 2019" features multiple users claiming they remember encountering the concept years earlier, some as far back as 2009. In May 2024, a Blame It on George tweet claimed that the earliest appearance of the image was from a now archived thread on 4chan allegedly posted in March 2011. However, all we have is a screenshot of the alleged thread. There's no verifiable evidence to support this claim. And even if it were confirmed, it might not prove that the Backrooms story and the phenomena around it ever predated the post in 2019. While the photograph was taken on June 12, 2002, according to its metadata, the idea of the Backrooms as a creepypasta didn't happen until much later. Google Trends supports this, as it shows no recorded use of the term Backrooms prior to 2019. That's not to say it's impossible that the image or the idea appeared earlier. It's plausible that the image got shared around, but never received a proper name that stuck. Once again, it's one of those things where we'll probably never know for sure, because if the idea was circulating pre-2019, it wasn't getting crawled by search engines. But I personally feel that there may be another explanation for why the Backrooms feel as though they've existed for much longer. I'm sure you've probably heard of the Mandela effect, the phenomena where large groups of people claim to share the same false memory. It's like how everyone thinks Darth Vader said, "Luke, I am your father," when the line is actually,
"No, I am your father."
The effect is named after the wide belief that activist Nelson Mandela died in prison in the 1980s, when in fact he lived until 2013. There are several theories about why this happens, ranging from psychological explanations to crazy conspiracy theories about alternate realities bleeding into our own. But the most sensible theory suggests that it could be the brain simply filling in memory gaps with the wrong info. For example, there was a documentary about a different activist who died in prison, and after 30 years, a lot of people misremembered that and thought it was Mandela. And this can be heightened by people sharing their own mistaken memories, which can then alter other people's memories of the same thing. And even though I accept that the Mandela effect is a psychological phenomenon, I can't deny that I do have the cornucopia Fruit of the Loom logo in my memory, but it was apparently never used by the company. In the case of the Backrooms, the same principle may apply. The image feels familiar because it resembles environments that we already recognize, such as offices and hallways, and the trend of posting liminal spaces in general was started a few years earlier in 2016. I swear, everything cool goes back to 2016. Also, the idea of the Backrooms isn't entirely unique, as it draws from similar horror tropes or stories about being trapped in another dimension or altered space. All of this kind of adds together to give some people a strange sense of deja vu when they encounter the Backrooms, which only adds to their infamy. But I don't think we'd still be talking about the Backrooms if the phenomenon ended there. For as long as stories have existed, audiences and fans have found ways to build on them, whether it's fan art, fan fiction, or reinterpretation. And when something proves successful, there's usually someone wanting to capitalize on that by creating something derivative of the original. But in most of these cases, there's a clear original creator or author who controls the limits and rules of the world and who decides how the story develops. And this is the idea that we recognize as canon. For example, the 10 Saw movies published by Lionsgate are considered canon, but that steamy fanfiction about a Tumblr user getting trapped in the glass coffin with Detective Hoffman doesn't qualify as an official part of the story. However, what we're seeing more and more with internet creations is that there is no officially recognized rights holder. The original Backrooms post and comment were both anonymous. There was no authority to say what was or wasn't true, which meant that almost immediately, the idea was opened up to what I call open source canon. Online communities started to form around the concept on dedicated Backrooms threads, and the idea began to evolve into something much larger. What was big in the community when I was most interested in it was the idea of creating additional levels or floors of the Backrooms, with some of them inhabited by hostile creatures and entities. It takes that idea from the OG comment, God save you if you hear something wandering around nearby because it sure as hell has heard you, and as with any IP that expands past one entry, as the lore expanded, it created a divide, with the fandom ultimately breaking off into two groups, those that embraced the new lore, and those who preferred the simplicity of the original concept. A new subreddit called r/TrueBackrooms was created by a user named Litbeep, which asked its users to follow a strict guideline of what constituted a backroom, including no monsters, humanoids, windows, or levels. The backroom purists, if you will, which I get, but it is kind of funny to me. There are purists in a lot of things that I'm interested in, whether it be 90s Weezer fans or people who think that YouTube died when Google bought it back in 2006, but True Backrooms was created on May 29th, 2019. Guys, it took 17 days for the fan base to split in half. Despite the divide, the expansion continued. New levels were constantly added, with each one varying in layout and appearance. Some were considered relatively safe, while others were inhabited by hostile entities. As of writing this script, there are currently around 1,000 levels, with some of those including sub-levels, and over 300 entities. Covering all of them would be impossible in one horror history episode, but I will take a closer look at a few of the highlights to give a sense of the lore that is developed. Level 0, also known as the lobby or the yellow hell, is the level most closely associated with the original image. All of the rooms in this level share the same features, like worn, damp carpets and fluorescent lighting. But despite the shared features, no two rooms are the same, with each one differing in shape and size. Despite the absence of any known entities, level 0 is still considered to be a threat to anyone who finds themselves transported there. The laws of physics and linear space don't apply. You could walk in a straight line and return to where you started, or find yourself in a completely different set of rooms. This distortion of space makes navigation impossible, contributing to a growing sense of confusion and psychological strain. The constant hum of the fluorescent bulbs induces headaches and fatigue, and many who find themselves trapped there also experience symptoms ranging from dehydration to starvation and even hallucinations. When it comes to exiting level 0, the lore becomes a little more confusing. Some interpretations suggest that if you wander far enough, the space will begin to transition into another level. Others describe throwing yourself through a flickering wall and collecting parts to repair a ladder that you then climb to retrieve a key. Level 11, previously known as the Endless City, or the City That Never Sleeps, used to be one of the safest levels. Instead of tight, enclosed rooms, it opened up into a cityscape resembling Chicago or New York, and containing unreachable landmarks from any number of American cities. It was one of the most habitable areas of the Backrooms, filled with streets, apartments, skyscrapers, and public areas. But due to the lack of conventional physics, the buildings can connect in impossible ways, buildings can glitch, and staircases often lead to nowhere. The city exists in a constant state of daylight, which seems to affect the rare entities that may be encountered, leading them to behave less aggressively. They include entities like facelings, faceless humanoids with only a smooth layer of skin where their facial features should be. Kinda like those generic cutouts that I sometimes use in my videos when I'm just looking to depict just like a generic archetype. There are also hounds, aggressive quadrupedal humanoids that appear hostile in earlier levels but now act as pedestrians and domesticated animals. But around 2021, later additions to the lore describe an event where a religious faction known as the Church of Tiana launched an assault on the city. After just 16 hours, the level was left completely destroyed, renamed the Ruined City, and no longer considered habitable. Not all of the levels stuck to the calm, disquieting atmosphere of the original Backrooms image, though. Like many things in internet horror, some of them got a little bit influenced by FNAF. Spaces such as Level 94, also known as Motion, combine childhood nostalgia with liminal horror, presented in a dreamcore, early cartoon-inspired style. The environment consists of rolling grassy hills, a small town, and a large floating castle positioned in the distance. It feels kind of like the background area in a Mario Kart track that you're supposed to see in the distance but never get close to. The bright colors and simplified shapes give it a distinctly animated look, closer to something you might associate with children's television, like the Nightmare Fuel Teletubbies. But if you want to know more about that, you gotta see my video on Teletubby horror. Yes, that is a real video. I'm a very special YouTuber. During the day, level 94 is considered relatively safe, with the siren poles playing distorted music keeping the entities away. But when night falls and the audio stops, the entities begin to appear, including the animated king, a plastic clown who attacks only when you have your back turned, and animations, creatures that move suddenly, like something out of an unfinished stop-motion animation. Meanwhile, Backrooms Level Fun is modeled on soft play areas, fun inflatables, and birthday party rooms. This is the FNAF one. Let's be real. This one was made by FNAF fans. And like Chuck E. Cheese's or Freddy Fazbear's, Level Fun is inhabited by sinister mascot-like entities known as partygoers. Don't mind us, it's just me partying with all my friends. I am using this as an invitation to my birthday this year. Probably no one will show up besides the other horror creators, but that's okay, because that's like half the people anyway. Credited with being the creators of Level Fun, partygoers are highly intelligent, hostile creatures that lure individuals in using balloons and either inject them with a transformation virus or simply kill them. This would actually make a good birthday party theme, you gotta admit. Unlike many of the other levels, the pool rooms, level 37, is considered one of the most calm and relatively safe spaces. Until I started researching this video, I actually didn't know that this had become connected with the Backrooms lore, because this is basically just a rebrand of an earlier viral concept called the Dream Pools, a series of 3D Blender creations made by digital artist Jared Pike beginning in 2020. Initially, the Dream Pools were more of a relaxing experience, with a hint of cosmic horror in that the pools seemed to stretch on and on forever, and ever and ever. But in 2022, they were retrofitted to coexist with Backrooms lore, and it became a little less colorful and a little lo-fi and a little more MC Escher. There are no widely agreed upon hostile entities, and the environment lacks the immediate sense of danger found in other areas. Instead, the focus is on the atmosphere of the space itself, which, to be fair here, does capture what the true Backrooms purists love so much about the original image. The layout can vary, with some areas opening up into larger pool complexes, while others narrow into corridors partially submerged in water. If there's any Backrooms level that I'd want to explore, it would probably be the pool rooms. That could be because I grew up going to indoor water parks in the Midwest where it was too cold to swim outside for most of the year, but I don't know, man, the place just looks cozy to me. But like level 0, navigation is an issue because there's no clear structure, so the lack of threat from any entities is made up for by the psychological challenge of traveling in endless space. Some levels move away from the exploration format entirely, such as level exclamation, also known as run for your life. Instead of wandering through various rooms, the level consists entirely of one long corridor you're forced to run while being pursued by multiple entities, including smilers, hounds, partygoers, facelings, and wretches. It feels like the Pale Lady should pop up any moment too, but that's a story for a different episode of Horror History. Which I did. So at this point in 2022, the Backrooms had been shaped by a community of fans, from this abstract image with a one-paragraph caption into something more structured and kind of game-like, which I guess is appropriate given the whole no-clip entry method. In fact, much of the footage that I have shown is actually not footage, but screen recordings of various Backrooms fan games intended to capture the ambiance of the various levels. I guess I don't have to call them fan games either, since the canon is open source, they're just games. But the result was a series of mapped-out levels with established rules, and to drive this point home, there's even a Backrooms wiki. So it was kind of like a new version of the SCP Foundation, which if you don't know what that is, it stands for Special Containment Procedures. It's basically a series of fictional documents written in the style of classified government procedures for containing these cryptid creatures. SCP is also more or less open source canon, albeit with moderators. So what SCP Foundation did for creatures, the Backrooms was doing for locations. And you'll even find short films and artwork placing SCP cryptids in the Backrooms. It's a perfect match. And speaking of film projects, there was one Backrooms web series that stood out from the rest like a stuck pixel on an LCD monitor, and it would come from a 16-year-old.
Can you please tell us your name?
Kane Parsons.
Created by Kane Parsons, a young YouTuber and filmmaker known online as Kane Pixels, the Backrooms were reimagined once again. Parsons has said that he developed an interest in visual effects and video creation from a young age, initially experimenting through sandbox games like Minecraft and Little Big Planets, before moving on to cameras and editing software to create his own short films. As someone who started my YouTube journey making Roller Coaster Tycoon videos, the sandbox game to filmmaker pipeline is so real.
That was the Backrooms.
As a teen, Kane got into visual effects and worked on a few videos for Nathan Barnett, also known as Dad on YouTube.
My name is DadBot87M2. I'm an average regular guy. Just a boring old dad living a normal life in town, USA.
In 2021, Kane released a series on his channel called Project 209, intended as a spin-off of the Surrealist Dad series, where Kane plays himself, forced to do VFX by a surveillance state. He also adapted the manga series Attack on Titan into a pseudo-documentary that was styled as found footage resembling early 20th century war recordings, which makes the Titans look even creepier than they do in the anime. Obviously, this would not be what Kane would become known for, but I think it's an interesting step in his evolution as a creator, because he's transforming an existing IP and adding to the horror by changing the presentation style. And I think that's a big part of what would later make people take notice of his work. And of course, he utilized his impressive visual effects skills while also using the low fidelity style to cover up the fact that he has no budget, which would later also be true of the Backrooms. Despite the ambitions of these projects, they largely went unnoticed, according to Kane.
The creative stuff that I really cared about wasn't really getting much attention. During that time, I was also submitting to some just local film festivals and handling that stuff in real life rather than doing it all over the internet.
Looking for a new direction, Parsons began searching for a different kind of idea.
I just came across one of the Backrooms images again. I thought it was neat because I love
environmental horror. I'm very obsessed with the look and feel of spaces, especially hostile spaces, just ones that feel like they don't really make sense.
Initially, his goal wasn't to expand on the concept, but to create his own liminal space. Using Blender, the 3D graphics creation suite, he started with the clip of someone rounding a corner and watching a chair hit a wall. That small scene would eventually evolve into a 9-minute short film that far surpassed even Parsons' imagination. In January 2022, Parsons uploaded the Backrooms found footage to YouTube. Presented as recovered footage discovered on September 23rd in 1996, the film follows a cameraman working on a short film who suddenly phases through the ground and finds himself trapped within the backrooms. As the cameraman wanders through the space, calling out for help, he comes across a warning written on the wall, urging him to stay still. Before he can fully process what it means, a stringy, tripod-esque creature appears behind him and begins to give chase, producing a terrifying sound. Rather than building a catalog of creatures like the online Backrooms mythology, Parsons' film focuses primarily on a single ambiguous presence, often referred to as the Lifeform Fellow.
Official title is Lifeform.
Lifeform Fellow.
Lifeform Fellow.
Yeah, sorry guys, you gotta update the wiki now.
The cameraman manages to escape by diving through a hole in the floor, continuing deeper into the environment. As he continues to explore, he finds a variety of architectural designs, ranging from a building resembling a hotel courtyard, an office space, and a wall of seemingly endless corridors that make me think government test site. After climbing a set of stairs, he finds himself back in the first area of the backrooms and is once again chased by the Lifeform.
Lifeform Fellow.
Lifeform Fellow. The cameraman is eventually caught and attacked by the creature, but his camera, which has been recording the entire time, clips back into reality maybe, that's just my interpretation, and it's suddenly falling through the sky before landing back on Earth. And perhaps the most amazing part is that the camera survives and keeps recording. Whoever made that camera, that's your Super Bowl commercial. That thing is more durable than Steve Harrington's plot armor. The reason I think the camera ended up back in the real world is because this video is titled The Backrooms Found Footage. Yes, the whole thing is a found footage web series, but only this and 2 other episodes have found footage in the title, and each of them are recorded by everyday citizens, not company employees like all the other uploads. This footage was literally found in universe. In the days following its release, the Backrooms found footage began to circulate within smaller online communities. Initially, much of its audience came from those already familiar with the Backrooms concept. But within a couple weeks, that audience began to grow and the video went viral. As of writing this script, the upload has over 75 million views.
So the first few days were probably a bulk of the viewers were Backrooms wiki fans, people who are already very familiar with the Backrooms. It just started snowballing. People wanted to hear what it was about. People started sharing it. A few days in, there were some channels reacting to it, and it was just unique enough that people wanted to share it around.
But rather than having his head turned by the dizzying highs of a rising view count, Kane began to work on the rest of the web series, something he had a clear idea of from the very beginning. Unlike the established Backrooms lore online, this was not going to be a very collaborative creation. It's basically his own take on the Backrooms concept with its own canon, separate from the existing community. Over the following 12 months, he began releasing additional episodes, each one expanding on the same world, but doing so through fragments, allowing us, the audience, to fill in the gaps between episodes. Which does seem appropriate, since from the beginning, the Backrooms has always been about the community filling in gaps in information. We're introduced to a company known as Async Research Institute, a business that makes MRI machines who accidentally discovered how to open a gateway into the backrooms using their magnetic systems. In early 1988, they began testing a stable portal using what is described as a low-proximity magnetic distortion system. This gateway, referred to as the threshold, allows controlled access to the environment for the first time. Ivan Beck, the vice director of Async, hoped that the existence of this pocket dimension could offer ample amounts of storage, residential living spaces, as well as industrial space and corporate office space. Beck stated in a press conference that the project could save billions on property construction and management. This quote subtly implies that the backrooms themselves were discovered, not designed by Async, and that idea would be the impetus for future episodes. From there, the series follows Async's exploration of the backrooms. Teams are sent inside to document and map the space, attempting to understand its structure and its potential. But as these expeditions continue, the risks become increasingly clear. Like the protagonist seen in the original Backrooms found footage short film, others no-clip into the alternate reality and get lost within the environment, causing missing person reports to start to rise in the 4 years that followed the discovery of the Backrooms. There's a fun Easter egg here. This missing photo is actually the high school senior photo of Nathan Barnett, aka Dad, who Kane Parsons used to work with, and this one is a child's childhood photo of Kane himself. Though that kid is clearly older than 2 years old, right? This leads to a startling discovery on February 3rd, 1990, when scientists come across what appears to be a person overgrown with fungus, perhaps a victim of the lifeform fellow.
It's organic. It's some kind of fungus.
2 days later, an autopsy determined that the body had stopped decaying in certain places in a way that seemed unnatural. Async's higher-ups plan to commercialize the Backrooms, hoping to obtain one key resource from their examinations.
Money, 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 money.
The following episode, titled Informational Video, starts as you would expect, as sort of an employee training video.
For the sake of convenience, you may hear your peers refer to the project under any of the following titles: The Machine, The Door, The Backrooms.
He said it! He said the thing! But what happened next would be one of the most memorable storylines of the entire series. The rest of the episode informational video follows Async employee Peter Tench, who gets separated from his group of hazmat dudes as he investigates a strange noise.
Hey guys, can you hear this? Hey!
To me, it sounds like crowd noise, like a busy food court, or a crowd of people trying to get their money back at the Spirit Airlines desk. It's one of many examples I've noticed in the series of Kane's Backrooms randomly producing distorted versions of things from our world, the first being the empty office spaces of the rooms themselves. As Tench explores, he comes across a random pile of rubble, a dark room filled with forest murals and wheelbarrows, and eventually the facade of a house. He later finds his way back to this research room in the complex just over 2 months later. We know this because the events of informational video are labeled in the video description as taking place on February 29th, 1990, while the events of presentation, when he returns, take place May 8th. Bear in mind that February 29th, 1990 is not a real date, since there are only 28 days in February, and 1990 is not a leap year. My interpretation is that this date is in step with the nature of the rooms themselves. The pocket dimension exists outside of normal space, filling an area that shouldn't be physically possible, so it's not crazy to assume that it also exists outside of reality's flow of time as well. But let's rewind to the rescue effort during the time that Peter Tench was missing from space-time. Within a week of his disappearance, on March 5th, 1990, a series of motion detection cameras were set up in the area just beyond the threshold, hoping to find Tench or discover the anomaly that led to his disappearance. All it catches is normal activity from the scientists, until 3:53 the next morning, when a floating figure, possibly resembling the lifeform fellow, is captured in the distance near the ceiling. This form is much more loose and flowing than the stiff, rigid movements of the lifeform fellow seen later in the timeline, during the events of the Backrooms found footage, which doesn't begin until July 4th, 1991. Looking back at that footage, the graffiti on the wall tells the protagonist, "Don't move, stay still," right before the lifeform fellow appears in a form that seems to resemble a camera on top of a tripod. So I think the lifeform fellow first saw the motion detection cameras searching for Peter Tench in motion detected and turned itself into a living motion detection camera. This would follow the theme of the Backrooms mimicking real corporate office spaces and the noise Peter Tench heard before being zapped through time, which resembled a crowd of people from the real world. The Backrooms and its inhabitant are learning from our world and attempting to recreate it in a twisted, distorted way. Chronologically, the next entry is this one, titled March 11, 90. It's actually unlisted on the Kane Pixel channel. You can only find it by going to playlists and clicking on the Backrooms playlist. There's also a link in the description of Backrooms found footage. It's just a series of stills of the technology and some of the scientists working on the project, though their faces are redacted. The most interesting image is this one, a room flooded with water from this pipe. Pool rooms confirmed? Obviously, the missing employee Peter Tench is not recovered, but the search and exploration of the Backrooms goes on in my personal favorite episode, Pitfalls. The date is now May 6th, 1990, just over 2 months since the disappearance, and the new cameraman is named Marv E. Lee, or just Marv for short.
This is Marv 123. Marv, mic check 123.
They venture in deeper than ever before, using a tape dispenser as their trail of breadcrumbs back home, and come across this room where a door on the opposite side is separated by a series of pits. When Marvin tries to cross, something suddenly causes him to fall in, and he's dumped out in a lower, slightly greener level of the Backrooms, but maintains radio contact. While waiting for them to throw a rope, he hears a man screaming and follows the sound to a crooked hallway with a gap at the bottom, behind which he finds an outdoor neighborhood basked in red. The voice beckons him further until he goes into the last house on the left, past these mirrored street signs, down a narrow hall to a yellow room that someone seems to be living in, the voice calling out louder all the while. When he reaches it, he discovers it's coming from the Lifeform Fellow, who now takes on the tripod appearance for the first time chronologically.
That's not a person. That is not a fucking person!
The creature gives chase, all while emitting those agonized human cries, and Marvin is eventually pulled to safety. But the scary encounter represents another example of this mysterious life form encountering something from the real world, in this case, probably a victim of the Backrooms who clipped in and got lost in there, and mimicking its voice to deceive our protagonist. I think this is the perfect ability for the antagonist of a Backrooms series to have, because remember earlier when I talked about the Uncanny Valley effect? Well, there's a reason that we as humans are creeped out by the Uncanny Valley. It's a defense mechanism programmed into us to protect us from predators who might try to pose as humans. By adopting a human voice and calling for help, the Lifeform Fellow is tapping into that same fear. After reviewing the tape, a barrier is constructed, presumably to protect them from the monster. As I mentioned earlier, Peter Tench reemerges on May 8th, 1990, but from his point of view, he was only gone for a couple hours, having skipped through time. In the later episode Damage Control, it is revealed that sometime after the disappearance of Tench, Async faked his death as a car crash to avoid any bad press around the project. This caused a bit of a problem when he returned alive and well. Needing time to find a way to reverse this, Async held him underground, and over time, his mental state began to decline due to lack of stimulation. Meanwhile, on May 25th, 1990, the crew reopens the barrier and builds a bridge over the pitfalls so they can explore the area beyond it, this time with guns. It leads them to a white room where Marv comes across a misplaced ceiling tile and says this.
Is this just the natural state, or did something move these? I'm not sure which one I would prefer, but right now I'm kind of leaning towards the former.
By using the words, the natural states, he's telling us what I alluded to earlier, that none of the environments that they've explored so far were built by Async. And by suggesting that they're naturally occurring, he's lending greater credence to the idea suggested in Missing Persons, that there's an organic element at play here. Almost as if the Backrooms just grows on its own, like fungi. The team comes across a hand-drawn map, and it's not long before its illustrator makes an appearance. Peter Tench jumps out of the shadows and attacks one of the hazmat guys, Mark Bloom. After the reemergence of the missing Peter Tench, the confused and isolated Async scientist found a way to sneak into the complex and ambush the hazmat researchers, believing he was deliberately being trapped by the company. He asks if they held a funeral for him, to which they say yes. After learning this, he goes crazy and escapes the facility, shooting Mark in the process. Tench's body was later found outside by Async staff, having fallen down a hillside and hitting his head on a rock, at which point the people in charge of Async come clean and explain everything that happened with Tench, stating that when he reappeared, Tench was exhibiting behaviors commonly found in paranoid schizophrenics, leading to his ambushing of the hazmat team. The situation leaves Marv convinced that the Department of Energy killed Tench. On May 29th, another member of their hazmat team, George, takes over camera duty and documents this wall in the area beyond the pitfalls, where the wallpaper texture is stretched across the surface of the wall. It reminds me of something you might see on an amateur 3D model, where the texture doesn't fit the resolution of the polygon it's being placed on, so it gets stretched all the way and looks unnatural. In the room beyond that, several objects are stuck partially clipped into the floor, again, like something you might see in an unfinished game. The random areas of sunken floor space and the perfect hill also heavily resemble video game test levels, areas strictly created for the developers to test the physics and mechanics of a game while not bothering to make it aesthetically pleasing. At no point are we ever given any concrete answers about the meaning of the series, but if there's anything we've learned up to this point, it's that the Backrooms and the Lifeform Fellow are mimicking reality to draw people in, where they then attack, causing victims to go missing from the real world. One thought that crossed my mind was that Kane Parsons' Backrooms could be an allegory for video game addiction, where virtual worlds are created to mimic the real one, often leading to obsession and addicted players falling down rabbit holes, withdrawing from IRL interactions, and in some extreme cases, ruining their lives and losing touch with reality. But overall, while that theory makes some sense, I don't really feel like that's the intended message. These game-like distortions appear so late in the series, other than Noclipping, which has been there from the beginning. So I think the idea of addiction is actually just a subcategory of a larger theme, the overall idea of madness. Earlier in this episode, I mentioned the short story, The Yellow Wallpaper, and how it might connect to the Backrooms. The most obvious connection is visual, given that they both take place in yellow spaces with wallpaper. And similar to how the spaces in the open source canon version of the Backrooms shift, the narrator of the short story begins to believe that the wallpaper mutates over time. In both, the environment itself becomes the source of unease, with the narrator describing the wallpaper as repellent and sickly. Its repetitive, unnatural pattern slowly distorts the protagonist's perception of reality, much like the Backrooms, where the space itself begins to feel hostile the longer you stay in it. But the story of Peter Tench ties more closely with that of these short stories' narrator. In the yellow wallpaper, the narrator, a woman suffering from postpartum depression, is confined to a room by her husband, supposedly for her health. Although she is presented as unreliable, she gradually reveals that her husband has imprisoned her, refusing to allow her to socialize or exercise. With the lack of stimulation, the narrator's mental health begins to deteriorate. She becomes convinced that a woman is trapped behind the wallpaper, and that she must free her by stripping the paper from the walls. By the end of the story, the woman's husband finds her room locked. When he finally gets in, he finds her circling the room on all fours, claiming, "I've got out at last," suggesting a complete mental breakdown. Like the narrator, Tench is confined for his own good, but without mental and physical stimulation, his mental health also begins to decline. Both characters come to believe that they're trapped within something artificial, something they need to escape. And while both ultimately escape their confines, the damage has already been done. The intentional link to the yellow wallpaper is further evidenced by the title of one of the unlisted episodes on the Kane Pixels channel, 9780-4152-63573, the ISBN, or International Standard Book Number, of the short story. Kane Parsons has even spoken about there being a deeper meaning behind the reference.
I did not shoehorn it in just because, oh look, it's a book about, it's got a yellow wallpaper. Guys, that means it's Backrooms. That there's more thought to it than that.
As I've already mentioned, by the time the web series was released, the Backrooms had already been expanded into a vast, community-driven mythology containing hundreds of levels with their own distinct rules and threads. But Parsons' interpretation moved away from that.
I was vaguely aware of the Backrooms, or I was aware of it in terms of the original image and the caption that I saw on Instagram 2 years before, but I had no idea there was this community behind it. So when I put out the first video, I was surprised to see all these people saying, "You're doing the Backrooms wrong! What is this?"
Rather than a collection of separate levels, his version presents the Backrooms as a single continuous space. It doesn't follow a clear system of levels. Instead, it mimics real-world architecture in a way that feels unstable and unpredictable, such as the gallery and courtyards design found in the Backrooms found footage being based on the Holiday Inn Express and Crown Plaza located at London Heathrow Airport, Terminal 4. The themes of madness and mimicry of the real world are tied together nicely in the feature film adaptation Backrooms. It's just called Backrooms, but I'll just refer to it as the Backrooms movie for the sake of clarity. I'm not going to spoil the plot because this video will come out before the movie, hopefully, but I can still do my timeline and analysis thing without spoiling it. It's set in June of 1990, so only about a month after the whole Peter Tench debacle. The story follows a man named Clark, a wannabe architect who is instead selling furniture after his divorce and struggling to come to terms with the night that his marriage fell apart, constantly reliving it in therapy sessions. When he discovers an entry point to the Backrooms in the store's basement, he goes from fascinated to obsessed, and it's here that we get a tiny crumb of information about how the Backrooms works.
All these rooms, this place built them. Actually, more like it remembers them. And the more times it remembers something, the less it does.
While this is just one character's interpretation of how the Backrooms works, there was a moment at the premiere during the Q&A where Kane himself essentially said, "Don't worry if you die in the Backrooms, because they will remember you and create something close to you as a copy." I wasn't recording it because I assumed someone else would upload the Q&A, but trust me, I wouldn't lie about this. Clark is able to find a strange comfort in the Backrooms. As someone who has been replaying the end of his marriage over and over in his head, reenacting it and trying to make it play out just a bit differently, a realm that takes elements of reality and distorts them ever so slightly is ideal for him. The movie contains more evidence that the Backrooms are an increasingly imperfect imitation of reality. We see an inverted stop sign, harkening back to the street signs seen in Pitfalls, this cardboard cutout, which would appear in the Backrooms Found Footage 3, and this sun painting, which also appeared in Found Footage 3, which I'll get to shortly. There's even an area where we see more of this location, and indeed, it does seem to be the Kane Pixels version of the pool rooms, which makes perfect sense if the Backrooms is just attempting to imitate indoor pools or baths. In the end, one character makes it all the way to the complex, where we learn that Async doesn't know much more about the Backrooms than we do, with one scientist stating that he goes back through the threshold every day just to learn a little bit more. The one thing the Backrooms movie doesn't seem to bring back is the lifeform fellow, but there are other lifeforms, or at least imitations of life, that can be found in the Backrooms. backrooms. It could be that the lifeform fellow isn't special, it's just another example of mimicry just like the lifeform scene in the movie. But I personally think that we just don't see it in the film because this is a different part of the backrooms, just a little bit further down from where the lifeform lives. And the reason I think this is because of some of the special capabilities we see over the course of the next 3 entries in the timeline. The original short film would be the next chapter in this story, taking place sometime after the Backrooms movie on July 4th, 1991. Also, in the video description, it says September 23, 1996, so this might be one of those instances where clipping into the Backrooms actually jumped the character forward in time. The next event chronologically is the beginning of Backrooms found footage number 3. We don't know the exact date, but a radio broadcast at the very beginning before the cameraman clips into the Backrooms says something about the Oklahoma City bombing.
In the Oklahoma City bombing.
So we can assume this recording began shortly after April 19th, 1995, the date of the Oklahoma City bombing. The cameraman, Ravi, clips out of reality in his basement and finds himself in the Backrooms. He encounters features not seen in the other entries, breaks the fourth wall by referencing the Backrooms origins, and he eventually realizes that something is chasing him, prompting him to run away towards the area that fans have dubbed as the Red City. It's almost like level 11 from the fan community, but it fits into the Kane Pixels canon because it's just an endlessly expansive urban sprawl, which makes Ravi realize the true scope of the labyrinth that he's trapped in. Later, he stumbles on a dance studio set up to play repetitive music, outside which he finds this, a Chinese poster that translates to 2022 Auspicious Free Clinic. Fans actually found the English version of this flyer, but the takeaway here is that we've time skipped again. Not just a couple months like before though, this seems to be another 27 years in the future. The dance studio is where he would finally encounter the thing that's been chasing him. This is the best look we get at it, and it's not a great one, but it does appear to be distinct from the Lifeform fellow and all of the entities that were seen in the movie. Also, apparently Kane confirmed on Discord that it's a different entity called Still Life. In the end, Ravi makes it to a house within the complex and goes inside, which always seems to be bad news, and this house is no exception. Ravi is able to communicate with the voice of a man.
It sounds like you're on the other side of this wall, but this door goes nowhere.
The man offers to open up the wall, but then screams as if he were attacked and goes quiet, which I see as not a real person in the Backrooms, but rather another mimicry of a human voice designed to make Ravi go insane. It's also another scene that parallels the short story, The Yellow Wallpaper. And if it is designed to make Ravi go insane, it works, shortly before his camera battery dies. Finally, the last entry we have in chronological order is Backrooms found footage number 2. This one is labeled August 19th, 1995 in the description, exactly 4 months after the Oklahoma City bombing. In this one, a girl has discovered a very small portal to the Backrooms on the floor of her garage and tapes it off just like Clark did in the movie. As she tries to measure the depth, the portal expands and she somehow falls through and discovers her own set of bizarre distortions of things that you might see in real life. She discovers a room with a crashed car, possibly the Backrooms recreation of the staged car crash that Async used to cover up Peter Tench's disappearance. The environment transitions to more of a residential interior, and she discovers this room covered in vines or branches. This looks and sounds similar to, or the same as, the Lifeform fellow, and the protagonist escapes through a pool room-esque area before eventually reaching a dead end, and, this happens. Surely you didn't think all of the answers would be given to us in a nice clean package, right? But I think that's why I'm still here 7 years after the Backrooms concept caught fire, still talking about it. We get little bits of information and we can make theories and make connections all day, but for everything we think we understand about them, there are at least 3 more questions that crop up. At the end of the Backrooms movie, one of the Async scientists, Phil, says that he goes into the Backrooms every day just hoping to learn one more thing about this incredible discovery. And isn't the same true of us as the audience? While the fan-created lore of the Backrooms often feels almost game-like, with safe zones, resources, and established ways of moving between levels, Kane Parsons' version leans more into science fiction. But as with many fields of science, like astronomy, cosmology, or theoretical physics, our own observations and theories only help us feel like we understand a small fraction of these fields. Which is part of the reason that taking a sci-fi approach to the 2019 4chan post was another great choice by Kane. I've talked about it before on my channel. In a world where information spreads at the speed of light and we think we know everything about how the world works, there's not really much for a 2026 adult to be afraid of. So by turning to this fictional field of science, a realm that both we and the characters barely understand, we're tapping back into that fear of the unknown. In many ways, I think Parsons' interpretation feels like a return to the original post that started it all. Obviously, the success of Parsons' web series marked a turning point for the Backrooms, credited with sparking a renewed surge in popularity and introducing it to a much broader audience and to other mediums. With Kane Pixels' Backrooms series absolutely raking in views, TikTok creators quickly adopted the concept and began making everything from Minecraft recreations to cardboard models like something you would find in a villain's workshop in a Saw movie, to just really well done parodies and memes.
Where the hell are we, lad? This place is weird, you know. I swear we just walked through here before.
Go, run, lad, run! Move! It's behind us! Keep on, left, just run! Go, idiot!
I mean, in 2022, I came across this video titled McDonald's in the Backrooms, and it honestly has no business being as scary as it is.
What the?
In October 2024, the anthology TV series American Horror Stories released an episode in its third season titled Backrooms, which followed a screenwriter who slips in and out of the backrooms as a result of his guilt over the disappearance of his child. I think it's pretty bad, and it misses the entire point of why people are drawn to the backrooms on almost every level, instead just using the concept as a vehicle for a very cliche, formulaic Hollywood plotline. For example, everything is spelled out for the audience, including a scene where a YouTuber who visited the backroom straight up tells the protagonist what he's experiencing is a manifestation of his guilt. A huge part of the appeal of Kane's series is that it remains ambiguous enough to encourage fans to try to piece things together on their own. They also try to make the backrooms themselves look dark and spooky, which totally misses the point of what makes it creepy. All the psychology of liminal spaces, incongruent affect, color theory, and madness that I talked about at the beginning of this video are disregarded, so the backrooms can look like another run-of-the-mill Ryan Murphy haunted house. The vague idea from the 4chan post about something that might hear you if you can hear it is replaced with a huge chorus of masked and hooded figures that could not be more in your face. Also, I don't think I've heard dialogue that was this exposition-y since I was in film school.
Someone who's fine doesn't ignore his best friend when he calls and calls repeatedly. Not after what's happened.
While American Horror Stories did not understand the assignment, it does feel like a rite of passage, if for no other reason, just the fact that this creepypasta became mainstream enough for Hollywood to completely botch it. In fact, liminal spaces have become so relevant that similar ideas can be seen in other shows, sometimes without explicitly referencing the backrooms at all. One example of this is the show Severance. While it's not directly connected to the backrooms, the show's creator, Dan Eichson, no, not Dan Erickson, referenced it as an influence on the show. That influence can be clearly seen in its monotonous corridors, office spaces, and vacant back rooms that appear to span on forever. On top of that, hundreds of Backrooms games have been released, with each one offering its own interpretation on the space. Some focused on exploration, while others leaned more into survival, adding monsters, objectives, and clear goals for players to follow. Games like the Backrooms game VR, Escape the Backrooms, and Inside the Backrooms each found new ways to immerse players in their worlds of seemingly endless rooms and the maddening buzz of fluorescent lights. The VR game is especially interesting to me because being in a VR headset for a long period of time can already be exhausting, so it might grate on the player in the same way that someone trapped in the creepypasta would feel. Despite the differences, most of these games follow a similar structure. Players are placed into an empty maze-like environment and tasked with navigating their way through it. Going through all these interpretations has really made me especially appreciate how Kane Parsons was able to make a mini-major studio film without compromising the integrity of what he built on YouTube.
Think of it as a large episode of the YouTube series that's sort of told in a slightly different way.
The big difference this time was instead of modeling everything in Blender, the movie was shot in 30,000 square feet of interconnected rooms that the cast and crew could physically walk through. According to Parsons, the finished set was so disorienting that some people were getting lost, which reminds me of stories that I've heard from the filming of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, where cast and crew actually had to navigate the infamous hedge maze to get from their living quarters to the set. Even the smallest details were carefully tested, including dozens of variations of the wallpaper to capture the exact tone that people associate with the Backrooms.
Do you care about retaining the vision and the feel of the viral stuff?
Absolutely, absolutely. I do not want to hand over the car keys and let it turn into something else. I wouldn't be doing this if the idea was for it to mutate into something else.
But despite everything that's been added, the thing that made the Backrooms so effective in the first place hasn't really changed. It's still just a space, an empty, familiar space that feels wrong. Whether it's an empty office or an abandoned theme park, a place you've seen before but can't quite recognize, we've all experienced something like it. This movie is probably going to be the biggest moment for the Backrooms, but that doesn't mean that the concept won't keep evolving. because it's not tied to a single story or a single creator. It's an idea that collectively belongs to the internet. Though I do wonder about who made those original posts. Probably kicking themselves for making them anonymous now that there's a $10 million movie based on their IP that they won't get any royalties for. If you want to hear the full backstories of other internet horror stories like Sonic.exe and just creepypasta itself, I'm kind of building a whole playlist here. You can find that on the left. Make sure you subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week, ring the death bell and select all notifications so you don't miss an upload, and I will see you in the next one. Assuming we both survive.